Hello, and welcome back for the afternoon program of the Libraries Are Essential program at the U.S. Book Show. This afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about what's ahead for libraries as we head into this brave new post-pandemic world. But I want to be clear, we're not saying that we are now in a post-pandemic world. Cases are still spiking and falling, and I think that's a big part of the tension, not only in libraries, but throughout the country, whether schools, offices, even bars and restaurants or sporting events. We're starting to approach life in most of the country like we're pre-pandemic, right? Masks are optional, vaccines are not required in many states, workplaces are open again, many without restriction, and emergency funding and other pandemic accommodations are ending or have already ended in some cases. So this afternoon, we're going to look at, a few critical areas for libraries: the digital realm, the physical workplace, and finally, how library leaders are approaching their post-pandemic future. And we're going to start the afternoon with a discussion about access to ebooks and digital content in libraries. Now, it's no secret that beginning in 2020, in the wake of the pandemic, library ebooks and digital audio really hit another gear, with demand and circulation surging. It's also no secret that the library ebook market, almost from its inception, has been pretty tense, with many publishers fretting about competition from digital lending, and librarians long insisting that library ebooks are good for publishers, and that the rather defensive pricing and restrictions offered by some major publishers are in fact not sustainable for libraries. And at a time when the publishing industry has a stated desire to address equity issues, that these practices are in fact fundamentally inequitable. At last year's Libraries Are Essential conference, we talked about a potential reset for the library ebook market. And over the last year, the library ebook market has now garnered the attention of lawmakers at the federal, state, and local levels. As of right now, 8 states have brought forward bills that would guarantee access to publicly available digital content in libraries. 2 of those bills passed, the first in Maryland in March of last year, and the second in New York in June of last year. And both, we should add, passed unanimously. But then came the lawyers. In December of 2021, the Association of American Publishers sued Maryland officials, claiming that the library ebook law in Maryland was preempted by federal copyright law. Citing those AAP claims, New York Governor Kathy Hochul vetoed her state's bill. And in February, a federal judge agreed with the AAP and enjoined the law in Maryland, finding that the law did indeed infringe upon the Federal Copyright Act. But while the law in Maryland is now enjoined, many library advocates say that this is just a bump in the digital road. The Maryland law may have run afoul of copyright law, but this was never really about copyright. Rather, the issue at hand is about fair and equitable access to digital content in libraries. And in our discussion today, we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by digital equity and why it's important, and what's next for ebooks as we head toward our post-pandemic future. And of course, now that Maryland's library ebook law has been set aside. And with that, please welcome my first guest this afternoon. Michael Blackwell is the director of the St. Mary's County Library in Maryland. He is an organizer of the Readers First Coalition, a coalition of libraries that advocate for equitable access to digital content in libraries. And yes, he is one of the librarians who advocated for the state of Maryland's library ebook law. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Carmi Parker is the database administrator at the Whatcom County Library System and serves as an executive advisor for the Washington Digital Library Consortium, which provides digital books to 850,000 residents of Washington state. She worked for Microsoft for 14 years before becoming a librarian. Oh no, there's our big tech library connection. Welcome, Carmi.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Kelvin Watson is executive director of the Las Vegas Clark County Library District and co-chair of the last iteration, I believe it's the last iteration, of the ALA's Digital Content Working Group. He is a veteran library leader with a list of achievements and awards as long as my arm, and he's a tireless advocate for digital content in libraries. Kelvin, welcome.
Nice to be here with you, Andrew, and with my fellow colleagues, and Michael and Carmi.
In a little bit, we're going to talk with Jenny Rose Halpern, who's the executive director of Library Futures, an advocacy group founded in 2020 to pursue policies that support the mission of libraries in the digital realm. but we're going to get started with our discussion here today. And to get us started, I wanted to start by taking the pulse of digital lending today. Libraries are open again, physical books are circulating, consumer book sales are really strong, well above pre-pandemic levels. So I want each of you to give us a little sense of where ebook demand and circulation is in your libraries. And Kelvin, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Andrew. So within my library, ebook usage continues to grow as we don't have as many people coming back into our libraries as I'll call pre-pandemic in 2019, early 2020, and so we've really focused on not only has it been growing, but we've actually been encouraging and actually offering digital library resources in places beyond our physical library or our website. So we put libraries on buses, for example, and so we've seen an increase, and I'll say we're encouraging the increase because of people again who are not coming into libraries borrowing physical material, and they are using more of our digital resources as a result.
Carmi, you want to give us a sense of what's happening in Washington?
Sure. It's slightly different than what Kelvin was talking about. Our circulation is down. It's well down from 2020, this time 2 years ago. And this first quarter, we were down 3% year over year with circulation, but our costs are up 30%. And we are trying to figure out what's going on there. One of the ideas we have is that in 2018 and 2019, 3 of the major publishers decided to stop offering perpetual use models and change to a 2-year model. And we're worried that we are now having to spend more money on replacements than ever before.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for that update. And Michael, what are you seeing in Maryland?
Well, print circulation is growing again, but it's not yet at pre-pandemic levels. It's about 66% of what it was, but digital circulation just went crazy during the pandemic. For the state of Maryland's consortium, it's up 55% since the pandemic began. At this point, it's starting to slow down. I don't expect to see the large digital gains continue, but it is going to continue to grow slowly. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. Now that people know those titles are there, they're going to want to continue to have access to them. And just to comment on something Carmi just said, I think current licensing make it impossible for us to meet much higher demand. And among libraries that are accounting, including Ocean State in Rhode Island, they're estimating that at least 25% of our purchases are going to relicense things we've already have and that we no longer have access to. It's really a problem for us.
Wow. What was that percentage again, Michael?
25%.
Wow. So we're going to talk about the Maryland Library ebook law. We have to. It was the big story, I think, of the last few months here, certainly maybe even the last year. But I'm hoping first, before we do that, we can define for our audience what we're talking about when we talk about equitable access to digital content. Just if we have like sort of a bedrock definition here. Michael, why don't I start with you? Can you help us understand that?
Well, one good aspect of the pandemic is that we've put a lot more money into expanding broadband access. And here in Maryland, there's been a concerted effort to go the last mile and reconnect people or connect people who have never had broadband access before. Library collections help bridge the content gap. Even once you have access, the question becomes, what do you have access to? And we want to ensure that everybody can see quality content, and above all, quality content that helps people see who they are, that reflects each individual user, that allows for self-discovery, self-enrichment, and self-development across political spectrums, across social spectrums, so that people can have good content that in a safe environment, which the internet does not always provide.
Great. Carmi, anything you want to add to that as how we're going to define equitable access to digital content?
Sure. I think for me, equity means a vision that I have for my community, the community my library and my consortium serves, where our books and our staff and our patrons, and even the booksellers in the community, all have access to a reflective, a set of content that reflects the community. And we have been working hard for 2 years on all kinds of different ways in the library to reach out to some of our underserved communities, which is exciting. We've taken real steps, and have been looking at our collection. And I am worried. For example, I think we have an opportunity to do a good job with equitable, representative access to materials for my community with print. But with digital books, it's different because they cost us triple what print costs, which means I can buy a third of as many books. And what that comes down to basically is if I have to make a decision between licensing Fahrenheit 451, which is $50 for 2 years, the digital copy, the print copy of the same book is $16, which means I can buy 2 other books. I can buy debut authors. I can buy the Native American or the Latin American heritage authors that my community is interested in. And I would like to be able to do that with digital as well as print.
That's a really good point. Kelvin, do you want to add anything before we start talking about the Maryland law, about what we're talking about when we talk about equitable access?
Sure. I want to actually just pull in basically what Carmi and Michael said and just say that equity really extends beyond equality. Fairness and universal access, to be deliberate and intentional with our efforts to create service delivery models that will make sure that all of our community members have the resources that they need. So often these needs are, across, race and ethnicity, but also religious beliefs. They're also sexual orientation, gender identification, socioeconomic status, physical, ability, and that, equitable access means fair and proportional access to digital resources that include ebooks, audiobooks, etc. It's very similar to the access that we have available for print materials. That there is an absence of those barriers, including costs and discriminatory practices, that all publishers and aggregators, regardless of size or distribution model, are making their resources available. One of the things that I want to just state, when we're talking about this, equitable access, goes back to our ALA core values. And that's that all information resources that are provided directly or indirectly by the library, regardless of technology, format, or methods of delivery, should be readily, equally, and equitably accessible for all library users.
Very well said. Thank you for that, Kelvin. Michael, as the Marylander, you're on. It's time to get into this a little bit. So, I want to start here in talking about the Maryland Library ebook law. And I'm going to assume most people listening to us today have some familiarity with what's gone on in the state. But I want to start here because there's a belief that was expressed by some publishers, or at least as expressed in the AP's lawsuit in Maryland, that these library ebook laws, including Maryland's, were sort of being pushed by, big tech, anti-copyright librarian lobbyists. And at one point, there was even a suggestion that state legislators were sort of being duped into supporting this legislation, unanimously duped. But Michael, as someone who was in the room where it happened, to quote Hamilton, I want you to tell us how this law came about and what Maryland librarians were hoping to address.
Well, first of all, I'm still waiting for Amazon and Google to call me my reward for leading the library charge to destroy the publishing industry, impoverish authors, and make all content free. Just another thing that has been said. Let's dispense with a couple of these charges that are made against state library laws. It's a pretty typical response from those in power when they're attacked. Let's play the victim. These guys have more whoppers than Burger King. First of all, ours is not a radical effort supported by big tech and anti-copyright lobbyists. No, our law was put forward by librarians like me, and neither I nor anyone associated with the Maryland law had ever consulted big tech or any anti-corporate lobbyists when we brought this forward. Now, given the outcome, maybe we should have. Have we talked with some copyright attorneys since then? Yes, lots of people have been interested in this, but I'm not going to call any of them anti-copyright. A misinformation campaign to dupe legislators? No, just the opposite. We have carefully presented our facts to legislators who are appalled to learn about the gulf between what happens with print and with digital. How the advance in technology has basically allowed publishers to avoid fair pricing and dispense with rights that libraries have under copyright. And I'll happily put that evidence for our claims forward anywhere, anytime. And anybody who has an open mind will look at that and see that, yes, we have a problem here. Even the judge in Maryland hearing said that, well, this is not a law for her court to decide, that libraries were not being treated unfairly. Legislators are angry, not only because they see that libraries are being disadvantaged and we cannot fulfill our mission of providing content equitably, but also just because these things are provided for by state funds and by local funds and by taxes, and taxpayers are being ripped off. So basically, those are easy things to say, but neither of them are true. Let's talk about how the Maryland law really did come about. The process actually started with a letter from librarians through our state senator, Nancy King, whom I thank for her advocacy, to our attorney general. And it was primarily in response to the Macmillan windowing that happened. And we asked about three things. Was Macmillan's licensing to the public, but not libraries, an unfair trade practice? Were Amazon, Audible, and Blackstone withholding content or libraries creating an unfair trade practice? Or internal to libraries, was Overdrive monopoly on the Kindle format creating an unfair library marketplace and disadvantaging their competitors? And what we heard back from the Attorney General was that these things had to be decided in court or by putting forward a law. So I'd say out of desperation, out of frustration, we decided to try a law. New York and Connecticut had bills pending that had been derailed when the pandemic came along and closed legislators. So we just took that language and ran with it. What did we hope to achieve? Well, we didn't think the publishers would be threatened, frankly. If anything, they thought they would all just say, hey, we're already giving you reasonable terms, and then talk about how important libraries are as partners to them. So what we really hope is to bring attention to how bad libraries have it and to join with other states in promoting equity of access. Now, we did hope that the publishers withholding content, Amazon, Audible, Blackstone, would make it available, and subsequently they did. So we'd have to say the Maryland law had at least one good effect. I think there probably was a cause and effect there, although only those publishers know for sure. We did have one big hope, and I think in retrospect, we were being naive. What we really wanted was that some of the big publishers would do something that they've never done before, at least in good faith, and that is individually, they can't all talk together, but sit down with us individually and negotiate with libraries instead of just setting constantly worse terms. I still hope for that. Publishers and individual, all of you now, can we talk?
So I'm sure you're disappointed that the law was struck down. But what happens next? Can you talk about? I mean, the issue obviously was not to undermine copyright here, even though the law ran afoul of copyright in Maryland. You've stated what the law's intention was. So what happens now? Do you think that you can move forward by talking with publishers, that this will get them to the table, or will you redraft the law and try to skin the cat another way?
Well, we hope for talking with publishers, absolutely. But if that doesn't happen, we're prepared to move forward. I don't think copyright is as monolithic as the judge in Maryland suggested. Let's say a publisher decided not to sell to a certain locale, in our state, say not to sell to Baltimore City, or to sell to a well-to-do county like Montgomery at higher prices. Surely the state would have some interest in coming in and ensuring a fair marketplace. And that's kind of what we were after there. But what I'll say is that there's other laws that are still other bills that are still being considered to become laws. I think that Massachusetts has an excellent chance of passing, and I certainly hope that it does. These bills are all being tweaked so that they put the emphasis on libraries not entering into unfair contracts rather than on publishers having to provide content being forced to provide content, as the Maryland bill was interpreted to do, and I don't think that's what we meant it to do. So let's say one of those bills comes into effect, it becomes a law, and the publishers come forward and talk then. That would be the best possible outcome. But let's say that that doesn't happen. We in Maryland will be back. We'll be retweaking our bill. I hope that other states will also consider coming back. Ultimately, what we'll have to hope for perhaps is action at the federal level. And if there's enough states that get involved, maybe that can happen. Although we do know that the publishers have incredible clout and the ability to make even federal legislators think twice. But we'll come back in Maryland if we need to. Let's hope that's not necessary. Worst case scenario, let's say over time things stay exactly the same. I think we in libraries are going to have to think pretty seriously about starting to withhold our dollars from publishers who will not give us a fair shake.
Carmi Parker is someone who works to license content for libraries every day. I know you follow the events in Maryland closely. What's your take on these state laws?
I think that the response to the state laws is very exciting. I saw two responses that interested me a lot, and one was the fact that in Maryland and New York, the legislators' response was almost unanimously in favor of these laws. Which, I mean, can you think of any other issue in the last 6 years that has unanimous bipartisan support? I was shocked when I saw that. And that is a real asset to have the support of legislators behind the mission of libraries. And I think, that's something that I feel very optimistic about. I do want to suggest that if any librarians are listening to this and are interested in legislation, or asking questions about what Maryland has been doing or some of the other states, you are welcome to contact readersfirst.org might be a good way to reach out. Michael and I are also available on email if our contact information will be available at the end, perhaps. And I just want to reiterate that both, the legislators are behind this, and it feels so much better than in 2019 when we were looking at the Macmillan embargo and the Blackstone embargo at that time, and we were afraid that if Macmillan succeeded, the other publishers would start windowing content too. We are in a much better place at this point, and hats off to Michael and the other librarians who have been pursuing legislation, because I think that's a wonderful tool to have in our toolbox.
In a recent editorial, Carmi, you noted that libraries are in fact supporters of copyright, right? And as someone who's worked in the tech industry and is now a librarian, talk a little bit about how publishers and authors might actually benefit from working more closely with libraries in the digital realm.
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas about that. And I do want to reiterate, librarians, they defend copyright every single day. Like, we have this idea as a society that if Andrew, if you write a book, that book belongs to you. I can't take it and publish it or distribute it or do anything with it. That creative work is yours. And this is an idea that publishing depends on and that libraries depend on. And libraries and teachers and schools, communicate that and reiterate that idea to students and young people and adults every day. Whenever a librarian is helping a young person cite their sources, they're defending copyright and they're defending the author's rights to be appropriately remunerated for their work. And we're saying, creative work can be used without permission from the creator, but only in certain very limited ways. And we're going to help you with those ways. That's what we do. And I'm hoping that in spite of the different legislative agendas that libraries and publishers have at the moment, that we can think also about the fact that we share this vision for equity, digital equity, or I should say, a more equitable publishing ecosystem, right? So publishers have been working really hard for 2 years to diversify their authors. And now, we have these new debut authors. They're starting to put out books. At the same time, libraries have been working hard for 2 years to reach out to these underserved communities and start building bridges. And so libraries have the readers and the publishers have the books. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity to sort of be able to say, hey, we are going to be able to build readership, real readership for these new diverse authors. We want them to have sustainable careers. And one of the places that readership can start is at the library. So I'd encourage publishers who are listening, please reach out to your marketing experts, the ones who market to libraries, get their feedback on what libraries are saying, and make sure that they know about all of the things that they have to offer to the different libraries with many different communities. Kelvin, talked about the many different communities that we are paying attention to, and we have an opportunity to actually transform the reading ecosystem and make it more representative and make all voices created equal. And I want to emphasize what we share, and not allow the conflict over legislation, copyright, etc., to get in the way of our ability to create that reality.
I'd like to add something to what Carmi says, and that is, if we got more reasonable terms on individual titles, it will actually allow us to better serve our communities. We'll be able to put the same amount of money in, or even more. If we got better terms, we're only going to have an inflection point where we increasingly move towards digital. And if we can get better terms on each individual title, we'll be able to buy more new authors, more diverse authors, take money away from the bestsellers, which have the highest demand, and have a more balanced, diverse, and equitable collection.
Really good point. Kelvin, you've been active in these issues for years, and you co-chaired the last iteration of the ALA's Digital Content Working Group, which I think the last report came out in 2021 or at the end of 2020. Give us your impression of where you see us in terms of the digital library. Do you believe that we're at a point where we need legislators to sort of step in and set some ground rules for library access?
So Andrew, I would say yes, and you probably remember, I was on the first iteration of the Readers First as well, joining Michael and Carmi, and we've been in this, active alongside of each other for this. So certainly, I believe legislation is probably something we definitely should have in our toolkit. Carmi said that, and I totally agree. I also think that we have to not just have one magic bullet. What we need, this is a multi-pronged approach that we need to take from all angles: legislators, laws, working with our advocates, locally, nationally, the American Library Association, Urban Libraries Council, COSLA. I mean, there's a lot of us, and as we get together to solve this problem, again, not one approach. We need multiple approaches, because I've been working to expand ebook access since probably around 2012 or so, when the model started to change. And so again, that's my answer. When we talked about this in the final report as well, right, about the access, the expansion of voices, and having better models and terms, cost, availability by all publishers, by all providers. You heard me mention aggregators earlier as well. So our aggregators, those folks, distributors, also have a role in this as well, to make sure that we are providing the access that we as libraries are supposed to be doing for our communities. And so to Michael's point, if the cost goes down, that actually really expands and offers more voices, to our communities.
You actually did something with Macmillan Publishers in 2021 around Dan Rather's book, right? And you showed you libraries and publishers work together all the time and are capable of working together in innovative ways. Talk a little bit about what you did with What Unites Us.
So that was a pilot that Macmillan was willing to do and share with the folks living in Nevada. So that actually also included an aggregator. So I would be remiss if I didn't include that Bibliolabs played a role in connecting Macmillan with me and the library district here. And so what we did was we offered uh, access to Dan Rather's book, What Unites Us, for approximately 2 months to anyone in the state of Nevada, no library card required. And so this was a way to test a few different things out, right? Not just access, but cost, how many people would actually take advantage of using of reading the graphic novel. And so it was a success. And Dan Rather himself actually participated. So again, multi-pronged approach, right? The author, the publisher, an aggregator, and a library working together to provide access to content and information. And as you know, that was a pivotal time, tongue tie there, to actually have that discussion about what unites us as a country.
So when the Digital Content Working Group was first chartered in 2011, it was a very complex time. Library ebook lending was at a very early stage still. But what came out of that was this sense that we had sort of opened communication channels between libraries and publishers. So fast forward to this last iteration of the Digital Content Working Group and where we are today. Kelvin, are those channels as open as they need to be? And where would you like to see improvement if they're not?
Well, I can, you can probably see my facial expression. So I think Carmi and Michael said it best before me, and as well. I think we're back to where we were and having those conversations back in 2011, and certainly, this continues. So no, the communication is not where it needs to be. It's more. I think it's even closed off now even more with the pandemic. And that, to Michael's point, when he mentioned that with legislation, you would have thought the publishers would have been, more cooperative. We are defenders of copyright libraries. And so, you see that happen. And so, what are my suggestions? Again, I think this multi-pronged approach, continue to have these conversations, continue to push the publishers and the AAP when it comes to educating them more about libraries. It seems that we're still educating people about libraries, and that we're not against publishers or authors. We promote publishers and authors. We're the ones who connect the community to those resources. So more education. Again, that was 10 years ago, and we're still having the conversations that we were having. We have less access than we did back in 2011. At least at that, we're seeing and have seen the perpetual access go away. Those models go away. And so we're in a worse position than we were then. We've become, or the publishers in my mind have become more exclusive when it comes to working with libraries than inclusive, holistically.
I agree with Kelvin, and would just like to say that in a time when surveys like Pew show that reading as a pastime is under decline, and we are not seeing it necessarily succeed when confronted with social media, with other forms of entertainment, that publishers and libraries both have a stake in partnering to continue to make reading perhaps the most fulfilling of all pastimes that we believe it is.
Yeah, agreed. Carmi, I may as well ask you to weigh in on this as well. I mean, I know you've got some interesting thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about what Michael said and just envisioning, imagine a situation where the thing about digital content, right, is it's on people's phones, and phones are where people are now. So just imagine that we could together, put together a campaign or something where we invite people, instead of scrolling Facebook when they're waiting in line, they're actually reading a digital magazine or reading a digital book. We have all kinds of opportunities to reach all kinds of communities thanks to this amazing technology. And we are in conflict. And so I would like to figure out ways to get past that conflict. My mantra is that we know how to do print together, publishers and libraries, right? We've been doing print for more than a century. Publishers have been able to thrive, authors have been able to thrive. And so that's the baseline that I think we need to set for digital, and say, let's do digital the way we do print. Digital should be equally accessible to print, and it isn't. I can give you multiple ways in which it is not. I agree with Kelvin too that we are in worse shape than we were in 2011 as far as access goes, and that's, I think, something that we need to think about. But I believe we can all benefit from a minimum print-like level of access.
Well, we're running out of time here. I'm going to give you a minute each, maybe, to talk about it, if even that much. I just have to ask one question. We asked it last year in our session, and I'm going to ask it again this year. What is it that libraries need most from publishers in the digital marketplace going forward? I know it's a huge question. If you could just point out a couple of things, it'd be great to hear. And Carmi, I may as well start with you.
The first thing that leaps to mind, and the thing that has surprised me coming from another industry into the publishing industry, is the level of fear in traditional publishers. And I would invite publishers to inspect very, very closely sort of what their fears are, how their fears are driving them. I don't think that there is as much to fear from digital content and from libraries as they seem to think. And we can all prosper with a little more courage and a little less caution.
Indeed, if there's one thing we've learned in the last 2 years, is that in the last few years, actually, is that print is a lot more resilient than I think we initially gave it credit for in the early days of digital. Michael, what do we need?
We need variable and reasonable license terms. We can live with metered access, but a perpetual use or even ownership would be nice, especially that it seems 25% of our purchases will be of licenses that we've had before, and I'm only expecting that percentage to go up. Licensed by circulation, not by a time period. So give us 36 circulations in not 2 years. That's just exploding. We don't necessarily get as much as that as we might like. Most of all, give us print equivalent pricing. Don't make ebook prices that much more expensive on a per circulation basis than is print. I guess I'd say that for libraries, it's not time for a major shift to digital because of the disadvantages we're facing, but I'd say that we need to become tastemakers, steering readers to quality indie and small publisher content that we can have for better terms. We need to continue advocating at the state level, and we need ultimately to think about what's going to happen if the publishers will not meet us halfway.
Kelvin, I'm going to give you the last word today.
Wow, and I'll be I come after two great closers here, but what I'll say is I'll summarize and say, focusing on removing the barriers. Again, the cost models, coming back, understanding our needs on both sides, right, and really having some intentional, not just discussions but implementation around servicing our communities, continue to increase the users and readers. Taking advantage of the technology, as Carmi said, really transforming as the world around us has transformed, not just for libraries, but for publishers and authors as well. And then I'll end with what Michael, what Michael said, and that is, what are our contingency plans? Are we prepared as libraries to work more with those small and mid-sized publishers as well as the usage of self-published materials versus our reliability on the large publishers, including Amazon.
Hmm. Kelvin Watson, Michael Blackwell, Carmi Parker, fascinating discussion today. Thank you so much for participating in Libraries Are Essential at the U.S. Book Show today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
doing
Thank
that.
you.
Yes.
Thank you.